In my 36 years on the battlefields of the world, I've seen some pretty horrific things and lost quite a few friends. And remembering is a key part of what one does on the 11th, although one remembers them sort of all the time. People, really need to understand their history, and it's not uncool to read history books and find out what's happened. And I think it's very important for them to speak to their, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, they've got them, who will have all these stories. I'm Hamish, Bretton-Gordon, a former army officer, served in the British Army for 24 years and commanded the 1st Royal Tank Regiment. I joined back in 1988 as a Royal Tank Regiment officer. Within a very short time, I was in the First Gulf War, fighting in a Challenger 1 tank squadron. Then also my time, I did tours in Bosnia and Kosovo, United Nations in Cyprus, then also the Second Gulf War, and a number of tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Left in 2012, and then for the last 12 years, I've been on the battlefields of the world as a civilian, very much on the humanitarian side, and also looking for chemical weapons that Assad and Islamic State and other terror groups have used. I think any soldier will tell you the first time you're in contact with the enemy is a very defining moment. And my memories is on the first night of the Gulf War, thinking that every single tank shell, every round was being fired at me, and my driver in the vehicle got very upset after a while as we moved all the time. But one soon realised it was just the fog of war and battle. But that still sticks very firmly in my mind, as does times in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan dealing with a lot of chemical debris from the Taliban. And again, when I was a civilian working with the Peshmerga, who are the Iraqi Kurd military, Islamic State fired a lot of chemical weapons at us. And that was quite a defining moment, as was finding the remnants of some of Assad's chemical weapons in Syria, which we managed to get back eventually to the UN, and is part of the evidence that hopefully one day we'll get President Assad convicted at the International Criminal Court. When we think about Remembrance Day and the reason it's there, originally for the unbelievable carnage and casualties in the First World War. Now, in my 36 years on the battlefields of the world, I've seen some pretty horrific things and lost quite a few friends. And remembering is a key part of what one does on the 11th, although one remembers them sort of all the time. I think it's particularly poignant this year with what's happening in Ukraine. We're seeing casualty rates in the Donbass and in places like Kursk, similar levels to the First World War, 1,000 men on each side dying every day. And as things move forward, there is a possibility that Britain, the United Kingdom, might once again have to fight in the streets and the villages and towns of Europe if Putin defeats Ukraine. And I think that is something that we all must think about, because actually, for the 36 years I've been involved in this, it's been a volunteer army. It's volunteers like me who've done it. But if we have to fight like our forebears did in the First and Second World War in Europe again, it'll involve everybody. So I think this November the 11th is very, very poignant. And let's hope our leaders are aware of that and do all they can to prevent the war in Ukraine becoming a European war that we all have to fight in. Virtually every person in the United Kingdom will have some link to the military, and certainly if they speak to their grandparents, they will have greater links, and they'll find that members of their family fought and died, in France or in Germany or wherever, or in Iraq and Afghanistan, like I did, and some of my friends, are still out there in a foreign field. So it's vital people remember, because unless you remember about this devastation, you're not necessarily going to bend your back to its absolute limit to try and prevent it happening again. And although a lot of our new leaders in this country have very little military experience, hopefully they will have family and friends who have fought and died, that they can get that feeling from and work doubly hard to make sure that we get peace in Europe as soon as possible as their number one priority. When on the 11th of November they're at a cenotaph somewhere laying a wreath, it is not just a practical job that they have to do as part of whatever post they hold. It is a symbol of those who fought and died for this country, and a reminder to them to make sure that they do everything they can to ensure it doesn't happen again. The number one lesson: it's much better to negotiate a peace than have to fight for it. But if you have to fight, and sometimes you have to fight, you have to do it with all your nerve and strain every sinew. Fighting is not something you can do half-heartedly or do in small measures. If you fight, you're all in. When you decide you've got to fight, it's with everything you've got. Nothing should be left out there. You should never regret what you didn't do, because ultimately it's about being killed, surviving and killing. And that's why we need to avoid it if at all possible. But if we have to do it, we've got to do it with everything we've got. I'm sure everybody has their memories, but in Flanders Fields, that amazing poem with the poppies blowing, covered in the blood of those who fought there. To me, that is very much what it is. It's the blood of our forebears, whatever the practical and real botanical issues are, to me, are irrelevant. And that's why I think it's so important it stays as it is, a very simple tribute to those who've been before, and a real powerful message from them to us and those who go after us, to do all we can to make sure that we don't fight, but if we do fight, we do it with the sort of nerve and the energy and the total commitment that our forebears did in the First and Second World War. On Remembrance Sunday, I usually go to my local church, meet a few other military men who live in the local area, and it's the one time of year we put our Chester medals on, and I think it's important. The young kids who come up and are amazed by it. My generation, who do have a lot of medals because there's been a lot of fighting to do over the last 30 or so years, but it is a chance, and it's a chance for us to remember, but probably more importantly, it's a chance for the younger generation, the 10-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the 21-year-olds to see us veterans and have a chat and where was this medal from, where was that medal from, but also for us to not glorify this activity, but just show that sometimes you have to go and do things that you don't want to do, for the good of the country. And we don't want to be jingoistic or shout about it, but one Sunday a year, I think, is very apt. And certainly where I live in sort of Wiltshire-Dorset border, the place is crammed to the rafters, and everybody, has a good old think. Unfortunately, there are usually a few less each year, but that's where it is. And if I'm abroad, then just take a minute on the 11th hour to think about it. Think of those who never came back. People, really need to understand their history, and it's not uncool to read history books and find out what's happened. And I think it's very important for them to speak to their, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, they've got them, who will have all these stories. It is the current generation, the youngsters who are just starting school, that they are the ones who are going to direct the future. They are the ones who will decide war or not. They shouldn't just rely, on what they get on social media and the internet and what they watch on films and what games they play, because that's entertainment. War is not entertainment. War is reality. And the key thing that I hope they get from this is you've got to avoid it if at all possible. But sometimes you just have to fight. And when you do, you've got to be all in.